So to come to today's program, as we said, we want to talk about the historical entanglement of South African football with English football, as well as to try and understand what this tells us about politics and sports. And our guest, Chris Bolsmann, is perfectly placed to talk about it because he's researched this history. He's currently based at California State University in Northridge, specializing in the social history of sport. And together with Peter Leji, Chris co-edited South Africa and the Global Game, Football, Apartheid, and Beyond in 2010, as well as Africa's World Cup, Critical Reflections on Play, Patriotism, Spectatorship, and Space in South Africa in 2013, amongst many other books. So Chris, first of all, thank you very much for bringing on the show. Let's maybe start with a question that's a little bit personal. In South Africa, when people think about football, or as we say here, we've adopted the American terminology, soccer, people ordinarily think about it as a black sport. So, you know, when there's a white guy who's interested in the history of soccer in South Africa, people are often surprised to see that. So maybe start by telling us what your relationship is to it, how you came to have an interest in researching this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Well, good morning from Los Angeles. I'm really pleased to be part of this discussion. I think when people think of research projects and what people are researching, very often we start with the personal. We start with things that have impacted on our lives, and we look at issues that we're personally interested in. And I am South African, and I grew up in Pretoria. I grew up in Pretoria in the late 1970s. I started primary school in 1978, and one of the first games they taught us, and I went to a whites-only primary school, Hatfield Primary School. One of the first games they taught us was soccer, and I absolutely fell in love with the game of soccer, and carried on playing it throughout primary school, joined local whites-only soccer clubs, and then went to high school. As a 13-year-old boy, went to Pretoria Boys High, and Pretoria Boys High is famous for being a rugby playing school. And to my horror, that meant I couldn't play soccer any longer. And I tried playing rugby for one season, and I absolutely hated it. I wasn't very good at it, and I was in the scrum. And for anybody who knows anything about rugby, being in the scrum is not necessarily fun. And as a result, I continued to play soccer for my local club. And what would happen during the week, when we weren't training, I would go play pickup games with groups of black soccer players who were using the pitch. These were black workers of in the local restaurant industry in the neighborhood where I lived. And as a 15-year-old white South African kid, I got to meet black men for the first time as equals. In other words, equals on a soccer field, where that meant we played as equals, we won and we lost together. And my first experience of Pretoria's townships, Attridgeville and Mamelodi, was playing with the Hatfield All-Stars. Now, the Hatfield All-Stars was this black soccer team with this young white goalkeeper, and that was my experience of apartheid South Africa. And one has to ask questions then. This can't be normal, in that we play in segregated teams, we live in segregated suburbs, we go to segregated schools, but soccer introduced me to the majority of South Africans in a way, and that's why I am so interested in football in South Africa, because I think when I look at some of the important research that is, some of the research that we lean on, and I think of Eric Hobsbawm and Terence Ranger, their fabulous edited book called Invented Traditions, I think is very useful here. And when they speak about invented traditions, we speak of how an occurrence becomes the tradition, becomes the norm, becomes the history. And when we think of South African sport, very often we think of white people play rugby and black people play soccer. And I think my personal experience, and I think many South Africans' experience, is that that's not actually true. I think many black South Africans grew up playing rugby, as many white South Africans grew up playing soccer, and that's often overlooked. And that's why I'm particularly interested in looking at this history and, in a way, rewriting some of these concerns that I've raised.